debate?
I do.
The honourable member for Charlottetown Belvedere start debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to finally be talking about carbon pricing in the House, Mr. Speaker, after so many years of it being one of those things that we don't talk about in the House. Mr. Speaker, carbon pricing is about recognising the cost of pollution and accounting for those costs in daily decisions. Putting a price on carbon pollution is widely recognised as the most efficient means to reduce greenhouse gas emissions while also driving innovation. Since 2019, every jurisdiction in Canada, Mr. Speaker, has had a price on carbon pollution, including PEI, even if we don't talk about it. Canada's approach is flexible, and so the provinces have had a flexible approach. Any province or territory can design its own pricing system, tailored to local needs, or can choose the federal pricing system. In PEI, we have the system that was agreed and designed by the former Liberal government. Mr. Speaker, I was in the House when we were briefed on that initial Liberal carbon pricing bill. I remember the Minister and all of his team coming into our office in the basement, Mr. Speaker, and having to sit on the floor because we didn't have enough space or chairs for everybody. And at that time, that was when we found out about the number of exemptions that were going to be placed on many of the fuels that we use here in PEI, including heating fuels, cruise ships. And I also remember how shocking it was to hear that what we were actually going to be doing was rebating that carbon tax, that carbon price at the pump. And most shocking of all, Mr. Speaker, free driver's licenses. Well, we know that this government adopted that same carbon pricing plan minus the free driver's licenses, and that's what we've been under for the last couple of years. During that time, Mr. Speaker, we have had the opportunity to negotiate with the federal government, knowing, as the Minister for Environment previously stated, knowing that this was coming, that we were going to have by 2022 something in place that would allow for a $50 per tonne carbon pricing and then allowing for a $15 per tonne increase for every year thereafter to 2030. This is pretty straightforward. It's something that we've known about, that we've planned about and planned for, but the government has been remarkably silent on this until now. In fact, we now see this bill coming forward the week before it's due to be the law. And Mr. Speaker, if this bill was not presented in time, we would be going under the federal backstop as of April 1st. The federal backstop, honestly, Mr. Speaker, is not a bad thing. The federal backstop, or the federal pricing scheme, is what's in place in Saskatchewan, in Manitoba, in Ontario, and in Alberta. What that means is that the guidelines that the federal government expects to be in place are being honoured in those provinces. And what that means is that 90% of those rebates that are collected through carbon tax are being returned directly to the citizens in those provinces. What we have instead is a hybrid, and hybrid is good. We wouldn't be able to be participating in this legislature as we are today if we didn't have a change to the rules to allow for hybrid sittings. And when you have a hybrid approach, ideally that means that you have something that's been created for islanders, by islanders, and honours and respects the unique circumstances. And you know what? We do have that in our provincial pricing scheme. We have, for example, the exemption on marked fuels for agriculture and aquaculture, which is unique in the country and is something that we celebrate. It's something that actually the Green Party has always fought for, back from when we first built our first carbon pricing approach, I think in 2016. My colleague may have to correct me, but that's how long we've been talking about an island-built approach for carbon pricing, because we've known, even when other people wouldn't talk about it, that this is what we were going to have to do, Mr. Speaker, if we wanted to take climate change seriously. Now, when we were talking about it, we were the bad guys. We've always been the bad guys talking about this, and now here we are, funnily enough, with a plan that looks exactly like the plan that we have talked about since 2016, 2017, 2018, back when carbon tax was a bad word, Mr. Speaker. So in 2018, the Liberals sat on the floor in our office and told us about how they were going to do free driver's licenses and excise tax exemptions, and basically nobody would notice that there was a carbon tax and that would be fine. But now it's 2022 and we have to be honest about it. And being honest about that is also being honest about the choices that this government is going to make with the Climate Leadership Act, air quotes, the Climate Leadership Act that they are presenting to this House. Mr. Speaker, I cannot understand for the life of me how, when you've had 2+ years, almost 3 years, to negotiate with federal government in good faith, that this is the best that this government could do. Negotiations usually involve some form of compromise. Certainly in this House we've talked about compromise and collaboration enough, but I don't see compromise and collaboration in here. What I see is something that's designed to keep the maximum amount of revenue taken from every hard-working islander in this province and putting it into general revenue for this government to do with it what they choose to do. We would be better off adopting the federal backstop that we've been advocating for from the beginning, because then 90% of the revenues collected, 90%, Mr. Speaker, would be returned to islanders in the form of a rebate check on a quarterly basis, just like they're getting in Alberta, Ontario, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan. Instead, what this bill brings is a complicated taxation amendment that will provide islanders who earn less than $50,000 a year a one-time payment, of $140 for the whole year. $140. That's not enough to allow the average islander to offset the rising cost of living or offset how much they're spending with the carbon tax that's being deducted off the money that they spend when they fill their gas tank. It doesn't give them the incentive to transition to a greener lifestyle. 75% of that carbon tax revenue is being kept by government.
It's meant to change people, get them off.
Perhaps if you let me finish my remarks, you'd hear me say that. Why don't you just take a moment? 75%. 75% of the carbon tax revenue.
Member has the floor.
I have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 75% of the carbon tax revenue currently being deducted and continuing as we go into this new plan is being kept by government, who will pick winners and losers instead of letting islanders decide how to spend their money. Oh, it's tough hearing the truth. Okay. Yeah. Free heat pumps are a phenomenal program. It's really unfortunate the minister doesn't feel he should stay and listen to this. Free heat pumps are a great program, but not everybody, Mr. Speaker, can get one. What do they get? Rebates that aren't accessible to everybody are not equitable. Mr. Speaker, the Green Party is the only party that speaks about equity for all islanders. When we talk about all islanders, we mean everyone. Giving money that they have spent directly to islanders lets them decide how they can best reduce their emissions, and that will look different for different families. It gives them a better ability to make the right choices that they know are right for them and their families. This is better than trying to cobble together some one-size-fits-all government program at the 11th hour, especially when what you're offering islanders only covers a portion of the costs that you're incurring. And you can't participate if you don't put up a portion of the funds. I am disappointed, Mr. Speaker, that the Premier is choosing to withhold tax relief from islanders, because that's what this program does. Let's be clear, Mr. Speaker, the carbon price, the carbon tax is intended to encourage people to save money by reducing their fossil fuel use. The rebates are in place so families aren't harmed by the carbon price, but could save even more money if they drive less or install more efficient furnaces, better windows, or the heat pump. A carbon price incentivizes a change in behaviour. It is not, nor has it ever intended to be seen as a revenue source. Mr. Speaker, we can afford to do both. We can afford to provide the rebates, to invest in public transit, to incentivize islanders to make green energy choices and encourage islanders to make that transition to energy efficient sources, to greening, to decarbonising, and we can incentivize them with the carbon rebate as well. These are not mutually exclusive, Mr. Speaker. What is happening, Mr. Speaker, is we are doing exactly what the carbon price is not supposed to do. We are taking that money to fund programs that government decides. That is not how it's supposed to work. It goes against the very nature and concept of carbon pricing, and it is undermining the whole process and thought behind why and how a carbon pricing process works. Absolutely. We have to be able to trust islanders to make their own fiscal decisions. I cannot tell you, Mr. Speaker, how many times I'm having to explain to ordinary islanders why they are not getting the checks that their friends and neighbours and families are getting in other provinces. How can I explain to islanders that they should be getting $1,000 a year on a quarterly basis, and instead we might give them $140 if they're lucky? That's not any way that I can explain. You know, and this government is on record. This government is on record as saying that they don't trust islanders to be able to make those decisions. They don't trust government, and now we're seeing the proof in the design of these programs. Mr. Speaker, we are able to find money when we want to for just about anything, whether it's an Alliance for Wellbeing at $15 million, whether it's, you know, helping homeowners out with their waste watch fees at $1.5 million. Those are great programs. We can do that and rebate the tax fund. So if we want to have a fund that enables everybody to get who is eligible, but whether they be low income at $35,000 or $50,000 or whatever number we're going to pick, we should fund that from the funds that we have available. Maybe do a little less paving. Yeah. Because if it's really a priority, you make it a priority by showing that and putting your money where it is, but you don't do that by taking the money out of islanders' pockets, Mr. Speaker. We can afford to do both. We can afford to incentivize islanders to make the green transition and reward them with money back in their pockets by returning the revenues from the carbon tax to islanders. I cannot make this any clearer, Mr. Speaker. We have to trust islanders to make their own fiscal decisions, and this plan does not do that. This government does not believe in that. Mr. Speaker, it is very hard to sit in this House and hear day after day how this government speaks for all islanders, how they want to put money back in islanders' pockets, how they listen to islanders when they are not listening to them about this. Carbon tax is a reality. This is no longer up for debate. We are no longer discussing the impact of climate change. We absolutely know we have to do this, and we have less than 8 years, Mr. Speaker. We have less than 8 years to move. We cannot wait any longer. But this approach in this legislation is actually going to make it more difficult, because without that extra money going back to islanders, they can't make those choices. Instead, they are feeling upset and angry and abandoned by a government that said that they thought that everybody mattered, and they don't. I am absolutely in favour of every programme that we can do, Mr. Speaker, and putting every priority, including choosing not to do other projects if necessary, to get everybody into a green heating source, into more effective transportation, by investing in public transit, by making everyone available to be able to get off oil and into green solutions. But we cannot do that while taking money from islanders and using it for the projects that we choose. We have to give people both, and we can afford to do that if we choose to make it a priority. This legislation does not. I look forward to hearing from other colleagues their thoughts about the carbon tax, including my colleagues from the third party, who may have some explaining to do about whether they are in favour of taking money out of islanders' pockets and not giving it back. But, Mr. Speaker, we also have the debate when we come to the legislation on the floor. What I am hopeful for is that it will be very clear how government intends to spend that money and is able to clearly demonstrate how they are going to make it as equitable as possible, because right now, Mr. Speaker, this is not about all islanders. This is not about being fair. This is not about taking care of everyone. It's not about thinking that everyone deserves the same. And, you know, that's what we stand for, Mr. Speaker. That's what I stand for, and I'm proud to be able to say so today. Thank you for your time.